5 hours and change. Maybe Andrew Berry was just making sure all you Browns fans were home so you could witness all the moves. Cleveland Browns re-signed 2, free agency underway. Your latest Locked On Browns starts now.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound. LGB on the LOB, the Locked On Browns podcast, brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Your host, Jeff Lloyd. We are joined by the OBR's Pete Smith. I appreciate every one of you who make Locked On Browns your first listen every single day. The everyday crowd, the numbers keep going up. Obviously, the Judy reaction, the defensive primer we did yesterday, obviously some free agency talk today. Join the everyday crowd. Subscribe to Locked On Browns YouTube channel. Show is always available, always free, wherever you get your podcasts. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150. If your bet wins, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Cleveland Browns, look, slow start today. Time goes on. Re-sign Zadarius Smith, 2-year deal. Re-sign Maurice Hurst. 2 players who were vital, obviously, to the success of Cleveland Browns defensive line had last year. Obviously, started the day probably by big game hunting, chasing after Christian Wilkins. And then obviously the Raiders just came with an offer that nobody in the NFL is going to be able to top. That settled that. And then everybody else kind of just went back to their boards and started going from there. But Pete, 2 important ones brought back. Maurice Hurst, it was the same old story his entire career, trying to get a little traction going, different places, injuries for the Browns. He had a really, really nice run for them last year. Obviously, injury ended that year, but probably the most successful year he's had overall in the NFL. Zadarius Smith, people get focused on the statistical output, but don't understand truly maybe the impact that Zadarius Smith had. And with your edge room, you want 3 or 4 guys. You don't want to have to say, I need you to stay out there one more play. Somebody puts their hand up, you want to get them out. And that's where having guys like Alex Wright and the developmental path he is on is crucial, where you have obviously Miles and you also have Zadarius.
I just think the way the Browns set up their defensive line room, it made it sort of an awkward fit to find a replacement, because they have these big ends that can kick inside and rush from the interior. You have that with Alex Wright. You had that with Zadarius. And then you had signed Obo Okoronkwo last year, who is the guy you want to come in on, those obvious passing situations and be the edge opposite Myles Garrett. So, like, if you don't get that guy, if you don't get Z back, then you sort of don't have a whole lot of great options for that big end. Tyquan Lewis sort of stood out. He re-signed pretty quickly with the Colts. Maybe there was a world where you thought, I could try to get Eric Armstead, but I think he's going to get a lot more money than Zadarius did. Zadarius is good. His ability to rush from the B gap is valuable. Having the ability to have those big ends to stop the run on early downs and then be able to move them around as you want, which seems to be a big thing for Jim Schwartz. He likes these big defensive linemen you can just put anywhere on the field and just allow you to rush the passer more. I think, yes, we all want to see Zadarius get more pass rush production in terms of like the stat sheet. I think Zadarius wants more of that too, but the pressure rate was high. I think there's certainly opportunity for them to just get better this year. I think that's part of the reason they went out and got a new defensive line coach. And then Maurice Hurst is a perfect fit for just being an athletic energy guy who can just rush up the field and cause problems for certain types of offensive linemen, more athleticism. Again, being able to get in those, the so-called NASCAR package, or we got to come up with a better name than NASCAR package at this point. But that ability to get big and small as you want to play matchups is just a really valuable ability for the Browns.
Now, Pete, you look at the interior, obviously getting Maurice Hurst back, key. Was not a starter for this team last year, was a rotational piece and a darn good one for this team last year. The Jordan Elliott experiment, let's just please all hope that that is, probably something that is behind us. That does leave an opening here, obviously, for a starting defensive tackle. There are still several names available. Obviously, the big fish decided to go to Vegas, no state income tax, which makes that contract even look all the more impressive for Christian Wilkins. But that's probably was going into it, and it still currently is now, the Browns' no doubt biggest area of need, because you want to be able to have that same rotation interior that you do on the outside, and that's something obviously the Browns are looking to get to work on here, hopefully in the next 24, 48 hours. And everybody, don't go to bed early here on Monday, because do keep in mind, there was a flurry of defensive tackle signings late night day one last year, and the Dalvin Tomlinson one was definitely after some folks went to bed.
Yeah, I think the Browns want to get more production from the interior in general. I mean, I think that defense, everybody who's not named Myles Garrett, they'd like to see more from across the board, but particularly the interior. I think everybody's hoping that Dalvin Tomlinson has a better year 2 than he did year 1. I certainly hope they retain Shelby Harris. I think they got a ton of value out of that. But it would be nice. I mean, there's a reason that everybody wanted Christian Wilkins, is the ability to get another impact player that can constantly give you interior pressure is valuable. Now, did the Browns sort of use the budget on that for Zadarius Smith, or are they still out there looking? To be determined, but there's a couple guys that are just hanging out there. DJ Reader would be phenomenal, especially with Zadarius Smith here, because then again, you get that ability to go big and small. But there are some other guys hanging out there. Leonard Williams, who most recently played with Seattle and sort of not a well-known name, but he will get a lot of money from somebody. Eric Armstead's still out there. I think he's going to get a ton of money. But nevertheless, I think there's players out there that the Browns could potentially acquire. They might, who knows? They could look at a guy like the dude from the Washington Commanders, and Jonathan Allen, and he would be another guy that would be an impact player. Now, again, there's a sacrifice to be made if you're going to keep adding this much money, but they want to get as many talented bodies on the defensive front as possible, cause as much problem as they can on everybody else, and just continue to make that defense even better, and not have last year against what some people will look at as a weaker schedule compared to what we're looking at this year, and just sort of settle on their laurels. They want to keep moving forward.
It's so far. I mean, look, it took a while. It did, and it's funny that this is obviously the work we do, the content we do, and my wife several times, "Are you working?" Technically, I was working. Needed some info. We got some info, obviously, 5 hours in. Andrew Berry brings back Maurice Hurst. Andrew Berry brings back Zadarius Smith. Anthony Walker has signed a 1-year deal, goes back home to South Florida, the Miami Dolphins. Anthony Walker, it was a nice run here. I mean, obviously, a lot of people remember the time that was missed. But, a lot of influence on, helping younger players become professionals, how to do it the right way. And certainly a big influence on Jeremiah Usu-Koromoa, who's probably, in my opinion, again, was one of the most improved players in the NFL last year. So all the best to Anthony Walker. We're going to continue on here. There's a lot of talk about this time about a year ago about how the NFL running backs thought they were getting the short end of the stick. I'm not so sure they believe that's the case anymore. We continue on your latest Locked On Browns. Say goodbye to busted brackets, because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Continuing on here, your latest Locked On Browns. Your host, Jeff Lloyd, joined by the OBR's Pete Smith. We appreciate everybody who makes Locked On Browns their first listen every single day. The everyday crowd are a bunch of filthy animals, but they're my filthy animals, and I love you all to death. Join the everyday crowd. Subscribe to Locked On Browns YouTube channel. Show is always available, always free, wherever you get your podcasts. Now, Pete, there had been a lot of talk leading up to this, obviously, and from what the talk was a year ago. Apparently, there was the big Zoom call. I'm sure the spike in the salary cap probably had something to do to this, but you had a very, very strange free agent running back class where there were a lot of good names, household names, guys still capable of being running back ones. Most of them have already been taken off the board, but these guys got paid. The market for them was rich, and it happened quickly.
Well, here's the thing. Everybody likes to talk about how easy it is to get a running back and how, you don't want to pay them until you don't have one. And then it's a very stressful situation when you don't have that guy you can count on to be able to run the ball, and you're sitting there watching and going, we need somebody. You can look at Saquon Barkley with the Eagles, and you can look at some of these deals and go, I don't know if I feel good about the deal. And that's fine. I would agree with you on some of them. But overall, you have to be able to run the ball. And we're seeing that. What did we see in the combined Final Four of the NFL last year? 4 teams that could run the ball and had good quarterback play. It was not one or the other. It was both. And obviously the quarterback part has become integral. If you want to be successful, you have to have that. But you cannot be a team that just passes the ball. You have to be able to do more. You have to be able to cause problems for defenses. You have to be able to force them into uncomfortable personnel packages, and being able to run the ball is effective for that. Now, your mindset on how you want to get there. Is it more investment in the offensive line? We've certainly seen plenty of that. Guards have cashed in big today, but you have to have somebody that can tote the rock, and ultimately teams are making the bets that these guys can do it. I think the NFC East is particularly interesting with some of the guys we got released, like Aaron Jones is suddenly free. Is he going to end up in a place like Dallas? But there's a lot of good running backs out there that have gotten decent chunk. Josh Jacobs' deal with the Packers is interesting. The fact that they chose him over Aaron Jones is fascinating to me. I'm curious to see how that works out. Tony Pollard going to Tennessee is interesting. Tennessee has done a couple of interesting moves. And some of these teams just have money to spend. I mean, there's a lot of teams that just have a ton of cap, and we just saw the cap go up $30 million. So there's a little bit of money just wasting away. In some respects, you have to spend it. And why not do it on running back when it's available?
Now, here's the thing. Obviously, look, this is a situation of need. I know I've talked about it several times. Pete, you and I have talked about this several times. Is you basically have a question mark next to Nick Chubb's name. You just don't know when he's going to return. Jerome Ford, Pierre Strong. Look, Jerome did what he did last year, and I think for the most part did a pretty good job. Hopefully, you think Deuce Staley is going to help with some improvement in that room, but you need somebody. Does Zach Moss do it for you? Who knows? Maybe Aaron Jones, although it might be a monetary amount the Browns certainly probably are not comfortable with. But something's got to be done here. You got to get somebody else in. Look, we all love Nick. We know how great Nick is. But, you just got to admit to yourself, and you got to be real with yourself, that you absolutely do not know when he will be available. But you cannot just sit around and wait. Hey, look, he comes back. Maybe he comes back a couple of weeks earlier than expected. It's a nice problem to have maybe at that point. Running back is a certainly position of attrition. Most of the time those things have a tendency to work themselves out. But this is still something I think that, and especially with the effort they put in, obviously, to bring in Judy, I don't think they're going to look at that running back room knowing they don't know when Nick's going to be here and just say, hey, yeah, we'll float, we'll tread water until Nick returns.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, Nick Chubb's camp seems to be quietly telling people that he's going to be ready for the season. I don't know that that's good for the Browns or for Chubb. And I don't think the Browns are planning for him to be back. And if he's not right, if he's not ready, then why carry him on the active roster when you can put him on PUP and IR and all these other things and get another back who's healthy? And then when Chubb is better, when Chubb is hopefully 100%, hopefully he can get back to being that guy. Even if it's week 14, as long as the Browns are playoff viable and you get that extra guy coming in and leading the way with your offense, that's a huge boost. Nobody's going to care at that point if he missed that time, as long as he's right and can lead them into the postseason. So whether it's half a season, a quarter season, whatever, the Browns have to at least address it. They can't be like, well, I hope he's going to be healthy, and then, oh crap, he's not, and now we're screwed. So you have to do something. I don't hate the idea of just drafting more guys. But certainly I think the Browns want to get another veteran in there just so they aren't in a situation where, hey, the draft comes and goes, the market doesn't play, the board doesn't play out like they like, and then they're stuck.
It is something that you're going to have to continue to look at, though. And look, if and you saw with a lot of the coverage today that basically, when they're bringing in the draft analysts, a lot of the talk was, hey, the veterans are getting paid. Is that maybe an indication that maybe people aren't so high on the running back class, which certainly would help and probably play into the hand of the Cleveland Browns. Still something obviously to certainly monitor here. Tight end position, most it looks like the Browns pretty much just going to have David Njoku to this point. We'll see the way the rest of that works out. Obviously, Browns no other moves to this point other than defense, quarterback situation still to be figured out. I mean, let's put it, Pete, for the sake of nothing, and just not want to see the kid get pissed on anymore. Bears, you want a 6th round pick, and we'll just take Justin Fields off your hands.
The longer this goes, I mean, we'll see. You haven't seen
this
much.
This kind of reminds me of Brady Quinn sitting in the green room on the draft. Just like nobody wants him.
Yeah, that part of that's unfortunate. Part of this is just the market at work, and that there are quarterbacks that are sitting out there that could theoretically play for your team. If a team is going to sign Jacoby Brissett, for example, to be your guy ahead of a rookie, then you don't need Justin Fields. But at some point, it makes sense to sort of take a flyer on it if it's that cheap. The problem is, as we've discussed, is you either have to pick up his 5th-year option, you have to extend him, or you have to let him walk. Well, at a 6th-round pick, you're probably okay with the let him walk and see how it goes. Frankly, I think if the Browns were to acquire Justin Fields, they'd be doing Justin Fields a massive favor. I think Kevin Stefanski could be really good for Justin Fields. And certainly it gives you an option to see if you can resurrect his career. But I am curious to see where that goes. I am curious to see where he ends up, because every team that gets mentioned suddenly makes a move for somebody else. So he's like the good luck Chuck sort of effect here, where if you mention Justin Fields, you're about to get the quarterback you actually want, or some other bridge, either way.
Well, and there's 2 things here, and this is kind of and an official now, Brian Burns has been traded to the New York Giants. We will certainly look to see for details on that. But this does feel somewhat similar to Baker Mayfield 2 years ago for Justin Fields. Obviously, Baker Mayfield had a lot more success than Justin Fields has to this point, but it was kind of the same thing with Baker 2 years ago. And it was, this team did this. Well, maybe Baker Mayfield will go, and then it was that. And it went down, and it basically moved all around. Remember, the Colts look like a great option. Oh, wait, Matt Ryan's corpse is going to go to Indianapolis. All right, let's see if we can find another home for Baker Mayfield. Where if you're talking about Justin Fields, more actuality, you were talking about the Sam Darnold situation when he was leaving the New York Jets. If you go back, you look, both guys have similar records at the point where their time was being over with the franchise that drafted them. But now you have teams saying, well, can we get Sam Darnold in here? But meanwhile, he's floated around for 2 years, not really done anything. And then there's Justin Fields year 4. And look, the 5th-year option is a big part of it. And it may be something where, unfortunately, that Fields' camp is just going to have to say, look, we need to go somewhere where we can just go. You can't hold anybody up for $17 million. Obviously, it's going to be a big drawback for anybody, because most likely anybody's going to feel like they are actually doing you a favor by, bringing him in, of course, to begin with, but without having to worry about all that nonsense. You see the way it plays out, but it's obviously difficult. Justin Fields always going to be a beloved athlete in the state of Ohio. Certainly didn't work out with the Bears. His former offensive coordinator, a lot of people are trying to connect the dots there between the Raiders and obviously Justin Fields. A lot of people said, I don't know why you're connecting the dots. That didn't really work out anyway, but we're going to continue on here. Andrew Berry's been patient to this point, still a lot of meat on the bird left that Andrew Berry can go chase after. We're going to continue on here. Your latest Locked On Browns. Appreciate everybody for sticking around. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you would do if you had an extra hour in your day? Would you take that jog you always kid yourself and say you're going to take? Would you read a book? Would you say, hey, I know I've told you a million times I'm going to come down and help you with that. You know what? Today I will. A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you. Stack things of importance so that way you can make them a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you, what's important to you, so you can do more of it. I've got a balance between work. I've got to be the best husband I can be. I got to be the best son I can be. I got to be the best father I can be. And sometimes, obviously, some things get prioritized over others. I have to understand it's the right thing to do, and I'm not just necessarily saying no to people. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Segment 3, your latest Locked On Browns. Your host, Jeff Lloyd. The OBR's Pete Smith is in. We are about almost 7 hours into the legal tampering window, and we all know, wink, wink, obviously, wouldn't be as fast as these deals are done. But again, appreciate you all for sticking along. Obviously, I had a lot of shows here, content over the weekend, the Jerry Jeudy trade, obviously the defensive primer we put out last night. Starting to see, obviously, some moves trickle into this point, of course. Browns re-sign Maurice Hurst. Browns re-sign Zadarius Smith. Browns see Mike Ford go to the Houston Texans. Browns see Anthony Walker go to the Miami Dolphins. But, Pete, now this is it. Like the big part, the bigger names, some of and a lot of it, the Browns maybe did not necessarily have so much interest in. But now it's, here, what else can you get done? I mean, you consider the Zadarius Smith signing a big one. Normally the Browns have maybe 2 per cycle, and then a lot of, just business like, deals of signing guys in. What do you think? What do you think is left here? That Andrew Berry probably has a lot of appeal to. Obviously, Arik Armstead, obviously somebody at this defensive tackle position.
Well, I mean, the first thing is just you got to let the bad deals get out of the way, and the amount of stupid money that's been thrown around. And you have to wait until you can get the deals that make sense. The Browns have to be focused on return on investment because they are working on sort of a tight situation money-wise. It doesn't mean they can't make moves. It just means that they really need them to count. And part of that is spreading the, mitigating risk by having lots of good players as opposed to a couple of very, very good players. Certainly the interior defensive line has got to be a focus. Whether they're still going to be out there looking for, the big premium type guys, difficult to say at this point. Z may have gotten that money. They've got to find another linebacker, whether that's just re-signing Sione Takitaki and someone else potentially, or just seeing what's out there. There's a couple guys like Barton, Cody Barton's an example of a guy. There's Moreau. There's a lot of these sort of not a lot of names that jump out at you as far as, oh, he's a really good player, guys you recognize, but there are a lot of options in that field. And don't be surprised if the Browns want yet another veteran receiver. Now, I don't think that's going to be another big contract. And I've seen people who are like, hey, when are they going to get the good receiver? Like they have an unlimited amount of money. But it wouldn't surprise me if they bring in a guy like Cedric Wilson, a guy like, DPJ would sort of fit in this category. I think the Browns want to avoid being in a situation where they were last year, where Amari Cooper goes down or Elijah Moore goes down or whoever, and suddenly you're forced to play guys that they don't necessarily want to put in there. I think they want, and I think they also want to, similarly the defensive line, if they're going to run as much spread looks as we think they are, they just need depth because guys are just going to be tired. So getting another receiver could be a valuable option in that one, even if it's not again, it won't be a big contract. And then we'll see about DB. Are they going to try to bring in somebody else since they just lost Mike Ford? There's a hole there. So, the Browns don't have a ton of needs. Running back stands out as something that they'd like to get something done, but I don't think they have to. But, you know how Andrew Berry works. He wants to fill the holes on the roster as much as he can so he can go into the draft and these other things free and clear. And then the other part you sort of have to keep in mind is that trades are still out there. There are still a bunch of teams who have agreed to contracts already who are not under the cap. And that could mean deals that are still to come in the coming days, or the Zadarius Smith trade didn't happen until well into the offseason. I think it was
after the draft.
Yeah. So there's still the possibility that there may be a situation where somebody's looking to cut some payroll or whatever, or a guy just wants out, and the Browns just are like, okay, we'll take another good player that we can get at a reasonable cost. And I think the Browns want to keep themselves open to that. I don't think they want to lock themselves down where they're like, our roster's done. So there is some element of that, but I think the longer some of these players hang around, the more interesting they get. You'd like to hope, and obviously it's not realistic, that some of these teams have sort of punched themselves out already because they've thrown so much money around. But still, there are plenty of players out there that will have markets, plenty of guys that could be in the crosshairs for the Browns.
Brian Burns has been traded to the New York Giants in exchange for a second-round pick and a fifth-round pick. Brian Burns has signed a 5-year, $150 million extension with the New York Giants, $87 million guaranteed. Carolina, I don't know what's going on down there, because there were times you had 2 first-round picks offered for Brian Burns. Oh, Carolina. Oh, boy. Well, Brian Burns moves on. Giants, not much going on, but not a bad looking D-line at this point. Obviously, everybody stick around. I'll come back later with Browns making another acquisition tonight. Sitting around, this is what we do, man. This is, obviously a big week. We know you guys are all glued to the content, obviously. Hopefully, this continues here for the weeks to come here as we start rolling into even more and more draft coverage. Browns defense, look, the D-line was good last year. And just bringing these guys back, I still think the anticipation is overall the unit can be better next year. And it would be great as many guys that return, because I think the second year of all these guys playing together, the possibility for them being even better, improving, exists. So we'll see the way that all plays out. Obviously, Pete Smith, the OBR, everybody over there will be pumping out a lot of content this week. Make sure you were there. Obviously, content drops in the morning, afternoon, night, all day long. So make sure you're over there. Make sure you're following @ Pete Smith _ myself, Jeff Lloyd. Appreciate you all for making Locked On Browns your first listen every single day. If you are not part of the everyday crowd by now, make a new plan, stand, subscribe to Locked On Browns YouTube channel. The show is always available. It's always free wherever you get your podcasts. This has been your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound. LGB on ELOB. Let's go Browns.